All right, there we go. Now we should be live with both screens. Let's you'd think after 6 weeks I'd have the kind of this figured out by now, but again, that's my problem when I start drinking at noon on a Sunday afternoon. So, all right, now we're back. We're back, and we got all right. Watch video. All right, looks like we got a few people. It's starting to grow here a little bit. So, all right, sorry about that, guys. I'm apparently new at this, and I'm still struggling to get everything lined up. We'll give it a few minutes and see here. Today is yep, we're good. We're good. All right, Jason says we're both on, so we're good. So today is a fun one for me because Keith. I don't know, I was several years ago, you gave the presentation at the DA's office. Actually, I think it was before that. I did a show for the Genealogical Society. I think that may have been the first place that we met. And I figured out real quickly who I was talking to, that all of my my historical nonsense and bullshit that I made up wasn't going to fly for the Weld County Genealogical Society. And that's when I decided, all right, I'm just going to tell them that I make all this stuff up. But then that's when I found out that you were the guy on Wilbur French, and that you had the I don't know, I want to say the obsession of the Wilbur French story. So we
obsession is a good word.
Yeah. So we hung out a few times, and you kind of consulted a little bit on the on some of the bits I was working on the show, and told me where I was way off or where I was on. So then I got to know you a little bit better, and found out some of the really awesome things about you. So I'll give the real brief, and then I'll give you a few minutes to kind of give your little bio. That you spent almost 40 years in law enforcement in Northern Colorado. You were the investigator on some of the most high profile murder trials in Colorado, for sure, murder cases. One that recently featured you on NBC's Dateline for your work on it. So everybody, this is Keith Olson, and I'm gonna let Keith tell a few things about himself. So Keith.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Always good to see you. And so yeah, I started law enforcement in Weld County on April Fool's Day, 1978. And then retired in 2018. I left Greeley Police Department in 2009 to accept the position as the chief investigator for the Weld County District Attorney's Office. And so I spent just about 10 years there, and then retired to Florida. And as part of my life, my hobbies were not much different than what I did for a living, which was investigate crimes. I became interested in genealogy, history, Weld County history, war histories involving Weld County residents. But there was always the black and white photograph of W.D. French in the district attorney's office, hanging in the conference room, that I'd seen, and it caught my eye numerous times. It just talked about the lynching of W.D. French real briefly. And so there wasn't a lot of information, but like Mike Peters from the Tribune would every once in a while write stories about it, or it would be involved in the cemetery tours put on by Mike Peters and his wife, or ghost stories around Greeley involving this W.D. French. And I just wanted to know, it was such a unique piece of history, particularly for Greeley, when it was a, puritanical town at the time.
I mean, this was we're talking December of 1888, correct? That was when the lynching of Wilbur French happened, is December of 1888.
That's correct. And so for a district attorney's office to have that photograph hanging in their conference room, I mean, just my interest was piqued. And so I spent a lot of effort and time. Whenever I had some free time, I'd work on W.D. French, and just certain things happened that propelled it to where I'd completely put together the entire factual basis of the case and all the characters involved, his family, what his roots were, the land holdings he had, the estate. I had the probate records from his estate, which outlined the property that was settled because his wife had died prior to his being lynched, so that left the children of he and his wife as orphans when they lynched him. And so it was interesting to see what happened to the estate and if the children were able to benefit from it.
Well, we're going to get into the French from beginning to end. I want to talk about the day that he was on Woodbury's farm, and I want to talk about what happened, and then all the way up to was it December 20? It was before Christmas, December 22nd. Is that?
Yes.
Okay. So if anybody out there has seen the show, I do a WD French bit in the show, which is I remember I operate under the slogan of one of my heroes, Mark Twain, that never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So Keith is here to set the record straight on WD French for us. Whenever I have any buddies join me or come out and visit, one of the first places I take them is I take them to Lynn Grove Cemetery, and we go and we pay our respects to French, and we pay our respects to the circus folks, the circus folk grave
right
out there. And so one of the things that I've done, and this is going to be coming to you because I talked to you and you didn't do one, is I do rubbings. So I'll pack one of these up and send it to you. But a couple years ago, I sent all my so I'm so infatuated with this idea that I tried to buy one of the original photographs of the lynching, and I looked.
So have I.
Right,
so have I.
And they go for thousands of dollars. I think the one I could find sold at auction for what, $3,500. I don't know if you've seen one for cheaper or for more, but the one that I found was $3,500. So
well, they continue to go out and value their cabinet cards, and
yep.
They were printed by the local photographer, and he was selling them for $1 a photo.
Right.
And there were actually quite a few that were sold.
So what I do is, because I'm a collector, I have a prop maker who we're going to talk about here in a little bit, my friend Vic Nadata at Gemini Artifacts, and I think I gave you one of the reproductions that he made. So a couple years ago for Christmas, all of my buddies got one of these. And this is a picture of the lynching. It's a reproduction card with WD French grave dirt.
That's so cool.
So that's how obsessive compulsive we are about this. So Keith, I want you to I sent you a list of questions, and we kind of talked a little bit about it before. French is one of the most interesting things, but it's not by far the most interesting thing you've done. You were on recently. You were on Dateline for a murder that took 20 some years to solve, and it was the Tina Sandoval case. And I posted back on the Facebook page. I posted a few articles to where you can go back and read it. So I want to hear kind of your this happened. When was Tina Sandoval? When was she murdered? Anyway, it's been over 20 years. And when she left her house to go meet her soon to be ex-husband, she called her sister and she said, if anything happens to me, it was him. I mean, that was correct. That was her last words to her sister. And she disappeared. Right. She disappeared that night. And for 20 some years, I think everybody had the idea of what happened, but nobody could put the pieces together. And you finally kind of put the pieces together and put John Sandoval kind of in the corner. And did you know from day one? Did you have a feeling that it was John? Did you have a hunch that it was John?
Oh, I think it was much more than a hunch. I mean, when the sister is saying that, well, first of all, let me start out by saying that any homicide investigation is not an individual effort. It is a team effort. And I think that's why Greeley Police Department was so successful. It was never an individual investigator. It was always a team effort. And over the years, what would happen is if there was a homicide or a major case, and regardless of what your assignment was, the department would pull you from your current assignment because you had a specialty or good chemistry, And so a team would work on these cases. So sometimes I was investigator, sometimes supervisor, sometimes nothing more than an investigator helping on the case. But on this, and each case has that important moment that helps resolve the case. And on this one, the hero in the case immediately was Mike Moran, who was a desk officer when the sister and mother came in to report Tina missing. And usually a missing person report would be filed, and it might have been routed to investigations 3 or 4 days later. But he had known the name John Sandoval well enough, the notorious name of John Sandoval. Most members of Greeley Police Department knew who he was, including myself and the other investigators that night. And so as soon as he heard who it was, he notified me. I was working investigations that night, I think in the gang unit. And so, and then we brought in Brad Goldschmidt and Clay Buckingham, and we immediately focused our attention on John Sandoval. We even went to his house right away. So that's where our focus was. We were convinced, even more so, that he had done something to Tina when I went driving the neighborhoods thinking that, her car would be concealed within walking distance, because murders usually don't involve other people. So if it's a solo murder, he's on his own. So I found her car parked in a apartment complex about 3 blocks away from his house. And so and he was nowhere to be seen. And so that's when we set up surveillance on his house and sat there till the early morning, 4 or 5 in the morning. And he came home, and that basically solidified his involvement, because his clothes were muddy, his shoes were wet, there was a shovel in the car, a bucket.
Well, so that seems like that should be a pretty cut and dry case. I mean, but it took. I mean, it's to me, right? Who watches 90-minute documentaries on crime and they're solved. But real quick, I want to interrupt. I want to get back on this, but I just had a comment from Trina Durant Thurman, and she says Harry Woodbury's great granddaughter here. So we have a member of the Woodbury family watching us today. So
yes, and I've met Trina over the years, and she's provided information. Absolutely. She is a direct descendant. Yep.
So I just want to say she's on here. So back to the Tina Sandoval deal. I mean, I watched the Dateline, or and I saw that that. So what it sounds like everybody from the minute that Tina's mom and sister walked in, everybody knew it was John. What was the holdup, that the fact that you couldn't find a body? I mean, was that the missing piece that took 20 years?
Sure, and it wasn't the fact that we just that fact, but pretty much that's exactly what it was. And so the district attorney, we had enough clearly to arrest him. Mm-hmm. But Brad Goldschmidt, I think, was the lead investigator at that time. He came up with a case that he found that John had been inappropriately charged for a misdemeanor or petty offense, and it was actually, he was doing a panty burglary, and he should have been charged with burglary. So Brad put together this burglary case, and so we got him put in the penitentiary, for a couple of years anyway, while we were working the case and trying to put it together. And the district attorney didn't want to proceed without a body, because there's always that chance that
right.
you'd lose it, and you can't, under our laws, you can't retry someone just because a body's found, even if the body, had a signed confession on it from the suspect.
Well, and I think that's one of the, I mean, we forget as much as, and I'll say this so you don't have to, we forget that district attorneys they're politicians. And, they have a constituency to answer to that is not necessarily has the best interest of the public in mind. They have to win elections. So they obviously don't want to have a high profile case that they lose. So they wait until they have the evidence, which is good, because in this case, I mean, how many district attorneys did this go through? 3?
No, actually, the district attorney of record, when she disappeared, remained in that position for, I think, 14 years,
Okay.
13 years. And then Ken Buck became the district attorney. And in part, we had basically, as a police department, said, would you give this case a look to see if you would prosecute it if we supported you as district attorney? And he assured us he would. And so actually, the Police Officers Association backed him as DA. I mean, that's how important it was to the police department and the officers. Was, we were willing to put our efforts towards electing a district attorney who would prosecute the case.
Who would, yeah. So let's fast forward 20 some years, and John were you getting ready to try John, and they brought up the idea of the death penalty? Is that correct? And how what was the final putting John in the corner to get him to kind of talk? And I don't want to spoil the punchline for the people that don't know. Right. So build up to what happened and then how it was solved.
Okay, yeah. Let me start by saying, so we couldn't get a prosecution, and it was always something that stuck in our craw. Number one, because Greeley Police Department from 1985 to 2009, we had no unsolved homicides, which is unheard of.
Yeah.
I mean, that shows you how effective and professional the Greeley Police Department was. I mean, we took homicides serious, and the victims' plights and their families' plights is serious. And this case always stuck in our craw, and we weren't going to let it go. And so I reached out to Tad DiBiase. He is known as the no-body guy, the expert on no-body homicide cases. And so he compiled all this research dating back to the 18th century on all the no-body cases that had been prosecuted. And his statistics found that there was a conviction rate of like 88 or 98%. It was just an amazing number, where at the time, the district attorney, the former district attorney, actually thought that would be a huge impediment to the prosecution. Well, after talking to Tad DiBiase, we then went to work proving that she wasn't alive. And part of that was retracing all this stuff, put together the team again, and then we presented it to the district attorney's office. And it was a purely circumstantial case. And what's really interesting about this case and makes it historical is, one, there was no body, there was no statement or confession from the suspect, there was no crime scene. So all the other no body cases had one element, either a witness to the homicide, a confession, or a crime scene, and no body. We didn't have any of those. We had nothing other than, what we had was physical evidence, like scratch marks on his chest.
Yeah.
His chewing his fingernails off, spitting them in the interview room after we planted the idea that we're going to scrape his fingernails for evidence. So, and we're videotaping it. He can't get his fingernails off.
That's it. Right.
I mean, so all that to us was strong evidence of guilt. And then Mike Prill, the investigator who took over the case right before we prosecuted it, he listened to every single jail phone call that John Sandoval was receiving or making from the jail. And one of those was a phone call to his mother, and he said, "Mom, do you remember the night Tina disappeared? Your sewer line broke in the backyard, and I came out there and had to dig it up, and I got all muddy. It was all muddy and wet and everything." So he's trying to account for his clothes and stuff. Well, so we take a plumber and a camera and run it through the sewer line to show that there'd never been a patch or never been a break in that sewer line. So every time he'd make a statement, we would try to refute it with evidence.
So I have to ask, from being the armchair detective that watches investigative discovery and watches these shows, do criminals not understand that you guys are listening to their phone calls? I mean, I guess I hear all of these on investigative discovery, which my wife calls murder TV, and I have it on all the time. It's either that or Ghost Hunters. And they'll say stuff on the phone that is like, oh, you dummies. So I mean, did he? So actually, he knew that you were listening. So he's trying to plant stories and trying to plant.
Well, so each jail phone call begins with, "This phone call is being monitored and recorded by the Weld County Sheriff's Office." But see, that's the other interesting thing. Back in the 60s, law enforcement thought that they had been handcuffed by the Supreme Court when they ruled that you had to advise defendants of their rights before you talk to them about a crime. So every time
the Miranda versus State of California, correct? Yeah.
Sure, and so we're required to say you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed to represent you. That is generally not an impediment to getting a statement from a suspect. You tell them all this stuff, but see, they're more interested in, one, learning what you know, and two, convincing you that they aren't the suspect. I like to call it the pussball effect, because if you've committed a serious crime, you aren't sleeping, you aren't eating, you're worried that at any moment you're going to have to be held to account for that crime. So you want to try to relieve the stress by clearing your name.
Right.
That's why they're always willing, not always, but most of the time they're willing to talk to us. Sometimes 3, 4, 5 times.
Well, they just dig their hole. They're digging their own hole by talking and talking and talking, correct?
Right.
I mean,
right.
So
yeah, I mean, defendants do funny things, and
so we're going to wrap up the Sandoval case with how it ended. So you have him in custody, and he's chewing his fingernails off. 20 years later, is he in jail? Do you have a prosecutor that is willing to take it to court, and the threat of the death penalty is there, correct? So and this was under our past governor, correct? This was under Hickenlooper.
Okay, let me lay out the facts. So we went to trial with him. Ken Buck put together this all-star team of Michael Rourke, who's the current DA attorney for Weld County, and Matt Malaro, and then Kathy Holsher, an investigator from the DA's office, put together this all-star team to prosecute it. And we convicted him of first-degree murder. And so he got a life sentence with no chance of parole.
Okay.
Well, one of the problems was the judge made an error in that one of the psychologists testified about mathematical probability, which is not allowed testimony in the court, and the judge didn't admonish the jury to forget that statement or ignore that statement. So the Supreme Court said, now you have to retry it, Weld County. And so we were all set to do it again. I mean, we weren't.
You got him once. Mm-hmm.
Yep. But his attorney came to the district attorney and said, would you consider a deal if my client would tell you where the body is? So the district attorney went to the family and allowed their input. And they wanted Tina's body back.
And that was, I think that was the most.
Understand.
Absolutely. I think that was one of the most emotional parts of the Dateline, is when they've got the family sitting there saying, we were, here we have this guy that we knew did this 20 some years ago.
Yep.
And now he's telling us he will give us my sister's body if we make a deal. And what do they do? They're in even a worse, after 20 years, they're still under this scumbag's thumb of him making the decisions for them. And so he makes that offer, and you guys talk with the family. The DA talks with the family, and
so the district attorney says, let's get the body back, and we'll work out a deal. And I think the deal was a maximum of 20 years imprisonment.
And he's what now? 60?
Let's see. If he does his full time, I think his mandatory release date is 2033, and he'll be 68 in 2033.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Now each year he's got a parole hearing coming up in July. Each year there will be opposition by, I'm sure, the family, by the police department, and by the district attorney. And I'm sure it will be driven home like a nail that this individual withheld the location of Tina's body for 20 years and used it as a chip to secure his release.
So, and this is one of the things that A, fascinates me, and B, disturbs me the most about where the location of Tina's body was.
Sure.
I'm going to let you tell the story, because then I have a follow-up question, because I don't want to get it wrong, because I only watch the short clips on TV. So tell the story. He leads you to the body, and it is where?
Right. We are given a heads up that she's in the cemetery. Well, one, we always knew he had been a grave digger at Sunset Memorial Garden for a short time. Two,
and for the Greeley folks, that's the one on 34 and 35th, across from the Home Depot.
Correct. The one with no
headstones. Yes.
Right. Headstones, but they're all
they're flat. Yes.
Yeah. So we, within that first week of her disappearance, we had already been to the cemeteries and checked for open graves. We were told at that time that there were no open graves at Sunset Memorial Garden, that they had already set the concrete vaults in. So they dig the grave, and then they put a concrete vault in there, which is a liner for the casket to be set upon during the burial, or set into during the burial. So, and then I think it came up again. Well, someone said that they had heard at a party that he buried her in a cemetery. So went back there again and again checked, and they said, no, we had two burials that day.
So hold on, he told somebody that he buried her in a cemetery.
Unless that person was just bragging and guessed.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Really bizarre.
Okay.
So because we couldn't substantiate where their knowledge came from. So right. Detectives still went out to the cemetery, checked, and they said, yeah, okay, so there were two burials the day after her disappearance. So that means the graves would have been dug the day before. They said the vaults had been set that day that they were dug, because they would have been buried right away in the morning, so you don't have work crews around. You have to get it all prepped. So when the defense attorneys offered this, we still believed, well, it's got to be done. We knew the two burials that day, the two grave locations from that day. So our focus was immediately those two grave sites. And especially when we went back to the cemetery and said, no, let us look at the records. And so the detective, I think it was Greg Tharp, pulls the records from the cemetery and sees that the vault on one of the graves wasn't put into the grave until the following morning, because it was an afternoon burial. So all these years we had been believing that there's no way it could be in one of those two open graves, because the vaults had been set. So he directed us to Sunset Memorial Garden, a large group of us, 20 people, and he could only get to a certain area, and he said it's changed so much over time. I just know it's in this area. He couldn't point to a specific grave, number one, it wasn't marked at the time.
Right.
So he wouldn't know who the headstone was. So, but we already knew which one it was.
Right.
And prior to his arrival, I had already done the genealogical research on the person who was buried there.
So you had their family. You had the family on the Rolodex, right? Right.
So we got a hold of, I believe it was the son up in Wyoming, and said, "You aren't going to believe this, but here's what we believe occurred, and we believe that under your father is a homicide victim who's been missing for all these years, and you know, we could do two things: one, get an exhumation order from the judge, or get permission from the family." And they were adamant that they wanted that grave, that coffin exhumed and checked to see if she was under there.
And he was a decorated World War II veteran, correct?
Absolutely.
So that's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome that they were willing to do that. So was John Sandoval, and this will wrap up the John Sandoval conversation with this. Was he lucky, or do you think that was part of the planning, that he knew that that's where he was going with Tina after he killed her? Was that where he was going, or did he just stumble upon at the last minute?
I think he stumbled upon it.
Okay.
And we will never know, because he still has never talked. I mean, this guy is just evil.
Well, we have a post on the comments that says John Sandoval is such a dirtbag. So I think that's maybe the nicest way we can talk about John Sandoval on this on Facebook.
Right.
But so you said his release date is 2032, or that is the soonest that he could be released?
No, he could be released in July. I think his first hearing is in July.
So,
but like I say, our experience, and you know, I might be proven wrong. It's a totally different parole board, but our experience, Greeley has always picked certain paroles to contest on a regular basis. We even had John Gates, the current mayor. He started the program, and every bad guy that was up for parole, he would attend and sometimes take family or the assigned investigator and provide testimony at the hearings so that we could provide objection. And as I recall, we never lost an objection. So sure, they're eligible for parole, but the parole officers are citizens that are selected from the community.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter if the guy's all of a sudden has turned a new leaf. When you find out the true story, sitting there, you know, I would think most people would just be disgusted with him using her body as a bargaining chip for freedom.
So in wrapping this up, it's if you have demand, I actually watched it this week. If you have, I think, Keith, I lost you. Oh, there you're back. You're back. So the on demand, it's I forget the title, but if you go through it's The Devil Knows You're Watching, or what is the title of
The Devil Was Watching.
The Devil Was Watching on NBC's Dateline. Is it Dateline or Nightline? Dateline, right? Dateline. Yep. So you can pull it up on demand and watch it, and you'll see lots of scenes that look very similar to Greeley, Colorado, but they make it look a little bit more wild and wilderness than Greeley really is, but good. And you'll see Keith on the show quite a bit. So that is. I wanted to start with that because that was your most recent. I mean, I don't know how it feels to go from being on NBC to my silly little Sunday show, but I appreciate having you on nonetheless.
Well, so I got to tell you, you know, those people on Dateline, they treat you like you're their best friend.
Awesome.
I mean, so it's no different than you and I talking. You know, they immediately establish a rapport, and you become friends with all of them.
So did you actually? And this is just a fanboy in me. Did you actually get to meet Keith Morrison?
No, he wasn't the one who did it.
Okay.
But you know, the cameraman, the producers, they're all Emmy Award winners.
Right.
Not just one Emmy, multiple Emmys.
Right.
So yeah, it was pretty impressive, and it was first class. They even flew Valerie out there with us, put us in nice hotel downtown Greeley, and fed us well.
Awesome.
Got us a rental car. We were treated pretty well, but I got paid zero money.
Well,
which, you know what? I think what's nice is anytime we can shed a light on John Sandoval, I think it's excellent.
Well, I think right. I think your payment, although there was no money in it, your payment is that you got to share the story of and maybe somebody will have seen this or somebody will remember this story and be on that parole board or have a say or go speak on that. I mean, hearing those sisters talk about how much they loved Tina and how much the family relied on Tina. Tina was their superstar. Tina was that. I mean, they had all invested so much love in Tina. And it's heartbreaking. So I guess to everybody out there, if you get a chance, it's the one more time. What was the title? The Devil's Watching.
Devil is Watching.
The Devil is Watching on NBC Dateline. And when was it? In December or January?
I think it aired December of
2019. It was just yeah. So
yeah.
Okay. So
one thing I think that, you know, like Tina's brother Joe, he's a deputy down there. I think that was part of his impetus to get into law enforcement too.
Well, good.
I mean, all of them are just. It's a great family, and her dad was a former Greeley police officer too.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was recently a really high profile case. So one of the questions I had emailed you a couple weeks ago when I asked you to be on this was what are your greatest hits? I mean, I know we've talked a little bit about them. What is the Keith Olson? What's going on the back of your baseball card as your greatest hit? What is the one you're the most proud of? Would it be that?
That's right up there. But I got to tell you, and let me reemphasize this, just because it's so true. And you know, these were all team efforts.
Right, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So Brad Goldschmidt and I worked a homicide case, Monty Hughes, and she was left work on her way home, and she picked up a hitchhiker, and he took her out, forced her to drive out into the county, into a seed shed out in the middle of nowhere, and murdered her by stabbing her multiple times in the back.
And this was this man was a serial killer. This was Donald Long, correct? Who went on to kill how many people was Donald Long's scorecard?
Well, fortunately, because of Greeley Police Department's good work, we got him arrested, and so he was stopped at 2. Okay. Every time he'd have a fight, not every time, but the 2 times he had a fight with his girlfriend, Debbie, forgot her name.
Oh, Debbie.
I shouldn't. But anyway, every time he'd get in a fight with her, or the 2 times that he murdered, he'd get in a fight, get angry at her, and so he'd go kidnap a woman and then murder her. So that happened. First one was over in Fort Collins with Linda Holt. She's an accountant leaving her office late at night, and he forces her into her van and drives her over to Black Hollow Reservoir, ties her up to a tree, and murders her by stabbing her multiple times in the back. And then, lo and behold, a few weeks later, Monty Hughes. But again, I told you about those moments. I think the word is salient moments in a case. So this one is a police officer. He's doing a neighborhood check, and he talks to a woman in the neighborhood of where Monty Hughes' car had been found abandoned along the river back in the woods. And she goes, you know, let's see, her niece, she thought that her niece's boyfriend was somehow involved, or she had a vision. So she said, you know, I'm a soothsayer or whatever, and I had a vision. And so instantly, this officer provides that to Goldschmidt and I, saying that, hey, and the name was Donald Long. Well, Donald Long had come up in the homicide case involving Linda Holt as a possible suspect. And so we called Fort Collins PD. They had fingerprints in the van. They rushed him down to CBI, and the prints came back to Donald Long. So he was arrested shortly after Monty Hughes's car was found, and then some other things occurred, obviously. But he wound up getting two life sentences consecutive. So he's due to be, and I think his mandatory release date would be something like 22, 30 or something like that. So he'll die in prison.
Okay.
But yeah, he was definitely a serial killer.
Yeah. So I've got a quick, if you guys have any questions, post them on the Facebook, the thread on Facebook. We've got a good amount of viewers. So if you have any questions and have anything on anything, on any crime for Keith, chime in. My friend James Corbin wants to say hi. I don't know if you remember, James and I came out to your house when and he showed your grandkids some tricks as well. So my friend James is in New Orleans, and he made sure to tell you hi.
Yeah, so. And I missed stopping in New Orleans last time to go on his tour, but I still plan on hooking up with James and going on his fabulous tour in New Orleans. He knows I'm a fan.
I talked with my friends in New Orleans last night. I was on the Eureka Starfish virtual fortune telling show in New Orleans, and it looks like I'm going to go back in October. So we're all things, fingers crossed that I'll be back the week of Halloween in October for a couple of my for a couple of shows that I didn't get to do a couple of months ago. So a couple of housekeeping things real quick before we get further. I was so excited to talk, I forgot that I usually open with my housekeeping, and I got a few things. I want to make sure that next week everybody knows it's my friends Soydan and Chris Bogucki. We're the Big Icky. We're going to have a really fun show about all sorts of stuff. Soydan is he's from Turkey, and he's writing a book on Turkish coffee readings, and we're going to talk about that. And Chris, I got to do a show with Chris in South Carolina earlier this year, and I can't tell you how fun Chris is to watch. So just tune in. The other thing is I released my first effect to the magic world that's been published and produced through Gemini Artifacts. If you buy it between now and June 14th, it's called 38 Blocks at GeminiArtifacts.com. If you buy it between now and June 14th, you're entered into a drawing. On June 14th, my guest is going to be Dacre Stoker, who is the great grandnephew of Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula. And we're going to be giving away that day to anybody that buys 38 blocks between now and then. We're going to be giving away one of Gemini Artifacts and Cemetery Dance's reproduction first edition Draculas from the first U.S. edition. So all that stuff's on the website, but I just had to make sure I plug it. GeminiArtifacts.com. Vic is a rock star, and he's one of my favorite people in the world. So for that, also the Black Monarch. On June 7th, we'll be having an announcement about the mystery collection at the Black Monarch. I don't know if you saw this, Keith. I had a deal with the Black Monarch Hotel in Victor, Colorado. Have you ever been to Victor, Colorado?
No.
Victor is about 10 miles outside of Cripple Creek. It's about an hour up the mountains from Colorado Springs. Victor, Colorado is supposedly one of the most haunted towns in Colorado. And a dear friend, Adam, bought the hotel called the Black Monarch. It used to be a brothel casino, and he's turned it into a themed hotel where every room has a theme. He has a Nikola Tesla room. He has an H.H. Holmes room. He has an Elizabeth Bathory room. He has a tarot room, and he's working on several rooms. And he and I, my wife got me a weekend up there for Christmas, and we went, and he and we've become fast friends. And we're going to do some mystery collection weekends up there that are all-inclusive weekends. They include your meals, your room, a couple shows, a couple ghost tours. It's going to be a lot of fun. So stay tuned for June 7th for an announcement on that. He has offered everybody, if you buy gift cards at the Black Monarch, he's offered 50% off. So if you buy $100 worth of gift cards, you get $200. And those will be good for the Black Monarch mystery collection weekends. So that is... I think that is all for my my sales pitches. So we've got a quick question from our friend James. He says, "I'm curious. For you, is it more interesting, engaging to track down killers like Sandoval, or to do the historical investigative work like you're doing on French?"
Yeah, no. Clearly, putting handcuffs on a killer is there's just so much gratification, and then the conviction. There's, I mean, nothing like that when a bad animal has to go to prison, sometimes for life, for taking someone else's life. So yeah, no comparison. But I mean, in any investigation, in any research, like when I'm doing research on W.D. French or doing research on trying to locate people, it's like Christmas. So, I mean, if anyone wants to be a detective, every time you're working a case, it's like Christmas every day, because you're finding a new piece of evidence, and it's like opening that present that gives you thrill, opening it and seeing what it is, and so that's why it's such a needle in the arm investigations. And I feel the same way with doing research on historical characters, most of them outlaws, because it's you're constantly getting a piece of evidence that just thrills you.
Well, Keith, your website is weldcountypast.com. Is that correct?
Right.
And
correct.
So, and I've posted a link to it on the Mystery Collection page. Please check it out. It is deep stuff. I mean, and I'm not blowing smoke. It is, Keith does his research. When James and I got a chance to go out to his house, it was like, oh my God, I can't believe this is, I mean, I could have stayed there for several days. And I think finally your dear wife was like, all right, dude, you got to get out of here. You two guys have been here too long. You guys have been here too long. So, but, so to move on to some other cases, and I want to wrap up. We're about 45 minutes in, so in about 15 minutes, if we need to take a break, we can. And then the last hour, I really want to dig into the W.D. French story, and I really want to set the record straight for all the people that have seen my silly little show where I tell how much he loved his wife and the Pearl story. Yeah, I knew that'd get a laugh out of you. I knew that. So I have a couple questions for you, and we'll kind of rapid fire them. And then I want to talk about the summer of 2006, which was a pretty violent summer in Greeley, Colorado. That was the year that there were, I think, 6 or 7 gang murders, and it was 2007, 2008 that the Tribune ran the very calculated front page articles every Sunday on the gang violence in Greeley, which resulted in like 13 of 14 convictions or 13 of 13 convictions. But what I want to talk about first, here's the rapid fire questions. Real quickly, what is the case that keeps you up at night? What is the one that bothers you, or that, and it doesn't have to be one that you investigated. It could be a national
right.
or a world thing. What is the case that you wish you could just crack that nut, that you just wish you had just that one piece? You had that body or that hair sample or the.
Well, it's not that I wish I had one piece. Like I said, we were wildly successful when I was at Greeley Police Department. But the one regret was I was never brought into those assassination homicides up by Windsor, where the guy's riding the bicycle, the one girl's shot, she's driving near Fort Collins, Loveland killing. I was never brought in on that, and I just thought that those were. I wish I'd gotten to be a part of it.
Yeah.
Because I thought I had something to offer, but that was at the time that those are going on. Our focus at the district attorney's office, and that was one of the deals I made with Ken Buck. Was he said no more knives and guns? They're going to do nothing but white collar crimes. So I kind of left the homicide investigations behind once I went to the district attorney's office, which. Not complaining. I loved every minute of the district attorney's office. And, I think we were probably one of the only jurisdictions that were prosecuting people for the mortgage frauds, the construction frauds during the real estate collapse. And I think we had 2 or 3 banks that were seized by the feds.
I was in banking. I was a compliance officer for a community bank at that time. So I remember it well.
I mean, we had one development where all the houses were sold to straw purchasers. and every one of them was doomed to foreclosure because the straw purchaser would sign the documents and never make payments. Well, so we used the heck out of organized crime statutes when I was at the DA's office, because it truly was organized crime. These people that were the contractor fraud, which pretty sure had never been prosecuted. We sent one guy to prison for life as a habitual criminal for putting out there that he'd build pole barns, and then would leave these people with nothing but a shell, and they'd paid out $20,000-$30,000 and stuff. And we convicted him at trial, and then all the people we convicted for the mortgage frauds and stuff. And then one of my last case at the DA's office involved a family who had purchased a $25,000 Escalade over the internet, and it was a total scam being ran by Latvians and Russians on the internet, and they were out their money. So I put all that together, and I had identified over 480 victims throughout the United States, and
Wow.
and I think 150 suspects, and a loss of like $13 million. Well, those cases have all wrapped up, and the feds wound up convicting, I think, 13 of them, and seized a bunch of money and stuff. So hopefully those victims were made whole. But that's a case that doesn't get investigated because the feds have their dollar threshold. If it's not $1 million loss, I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah,
they
right.
don't do it. So I had to make a threshold, meet the threshold by putting together all these cases from throughout the United States, and then they finally took the case. And so that was, and then the other white collar crime is we just got a guilty plea from Janet Koretko on she was a ebook publisher and was.
I remember this. I remember, yeah, in Johnstown or Milliken, right? Was it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
She was writing romance novels.
Well, I think you say romance. I think one newspaper called it erotic fiction.
Okay, erotic, yeah, true. True, but it sounds better romance.
So, well, I got to ask you: did you get to read any of it as the investigator? Did you get to read? Was it absolute garbage?
Yeah. I hope none of the authors are watching, but yeah.
Right.
I mean, and some of them made six figures.
Right, I know. I
So I've been trying lately in my retirement. I've been writing some romantic novels. I mean, because I write better than they do.
Right.
I just may not have the imagination they do. I mean, some of theirs involve aliens.
Oh, hey, you're talking to the right crowd here. All my alien friends are like that. So I know you've been working on and we're gonna get to this. I'm jumping ahead, but you've been working on a French book, and I've been working on my mystery collection book for a couple of years, and I gotta tell you, I always thought anybody has a book in them. I think that was a Chuck Palahniuk quote. Everybody has one book in them. The trick is the second book. And writing a book is hard. It is really hard because I have the ideas up here. And when I put them on paper and I give them to somebody to read, it doesn't translate from the ideas to the paper. So I
Here's mine. It's never finished. A book is never finished. I mean, right. So, okay, now I'm going to publish the book. So I'm going, I need to clear up this point. So that takes you down another rabbit hole. And all of a sudden you're finding something else.
Right.
And we'll talk about that on the WD French.
Well, and especially, I was going to say, especially with you and the WD French, you're not done. You're not done.
Because I want to arrest all those people that lynched him.
Right, I know you do.
I want to make a case against all of them.
I know you do. And
I want their reputations, tarnished. Whether he was guilty of murder or not, what they did, I think, was just terrible.
Well,
and I know that was the era, but still, you had judges, you had district attorneys, you had sheriffs that all abdicated their responsibilities and let this occur. And it,
and I know that there's been a couple mock trials, and every mock trial that they put on, they found French. And we're getting ahead of ourselves, and I want to tease this because I have a couple more questions on the rapid fire, but there's no rapid to this. But the couple mock trials that they've done have found him not guilty of murder. Correct? French has been found not guilty of murder.
right. They had 2 mock trials, and both times the jury acquitted him.
Right. So, okay, so we'll ask a few more questions, and then we'll take a little bit of a break, and you can go refill. So the other question is I ask this of everybody who's on here because the majority of my audience comes to me because I deal with supernatural and paranormal, and I do. I mean, you can see all the craziness behind me. I don't know if you saw a couple weeks ago.
No, that's not crazy.
This hand right here a couple weeks ago, and I still have no explanation. When I was on with my dear friend Aiden Sinclair, this hand fell over. And I anyway, what scares Keith Olson?
And remember, I've seen Aiden too.
Oh, right. I forgot. Yes, you saw. Yes. So, did you see him at the Stanley?
Yeah, with Annabelle. Annabelle is she just loves this stuff. So she's my tag along.
Awesome. Well, I think if you ever come back, I think Aiden is going to be returning to the Stanley maybe later this year for a short time. So if you want to come back in Colorado, you open invitation. You can stay with me and we'll go up and see him. So anyway, so most of my audience comes from a paranormal, supernatural kind of slant. You've seen some, I imagine in your career, 40 plus years in law enforcement, you have seen some. Annabelle Olson says hello. So she's watching. So you've seen some ugly stuff in your life. I mean, you've seen some ugly people, some ugly situations. What scares Keith? What scares Keith Olson? What keeps you kind of on the edge? What bothers you enough to where it's real? It's not the TV and it's not the reading the books. What scares you, Keith?
Besides snakes.
All right.
I hate snakes, but what scares me?
So I guess to follow up on this, to add more to it is, there's stories of ghosts in the courthouse in downtown Greeley. There's the face in the clocks, and there's the woman that walks the halls, and there's everybody makes up the French story. Do you believe in ghosts? Do you have a ghost story? Do you have an encounter that you can't explain?
Well, no encounters and no ghosts, but I'm intrigued by it. I mean, I guess everyone is who does these kind of historical. I mean, I know of 2 instances where people in the 19th century were convinced that they had been impacted by W.D. French's ghost, and Annabelle and I did the haunted tour of the courthouse. That was exceptional. And W.D. French was brought out, but I don't. And also for your audience, it seems like every unsolved case, you have people who I don't know what you would call them. They have visions. We would always have people who would come forward and say that they had a vision and talk to us and try to. Sometimes victims' families would pay thousands of dollars for these people.
Well, there was the family in Cleveland that paid Sylvia Brown $20-some thousand to tell them that her daughter was dead, and they found her alive. In that house in Cleveland, 4 or 5 years ago. So, yeah, I have a routine, and I've done a lot of research on the Zodiac and the Zodiac killer. And the San Francisco Police Department hired psychic detectives, and I imagine, because I'm that guy, I imagine most of those psychic detectives were complete frauds. But
right,
I mean, I don't know.
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah, I've never been I've never voiced an opinion one way or the other, because just like on the Monty Hughes case, that woman was claiming to be had visions. Well, actually, what she was trying to do is help us solve the case.
Right.
So
right.
So I try not. I guess now I can do whatever I want. I can be critical of them or not, but I think some of them are frauds, and obviously they're in it for the money.
Right.
And another, somebody made the comment one time. I think it was Mike Pearl from the police department, that once a case, unsolved case, is solved, you would not believe by Googling how many of these people had visions and he told the police department or the family that this is, how it would turn out. So they're stealing,
Right.
the information and taking credit for it to boost their income, I guess.
Well, we're right at the halfway point, but I have two questions. One comes from Ron Brown, and he says, have you encountered witches or any witchcraft?
Well, obviously in law enforcement, you're going to come across people who say they're witches or warlocks and stuff. Some of them have, the pentagram. And then I was around during the heyday of the witch ceremonies up by Windsor. What was the name of that area?
I remember growing up as a kid that everybody thought Windsor was like the Satanist capital of Colorado, and all the witches lived in Windsor, Colorado.
Yeah, and we'd get called to scenes where the pentagram is spray painted into a concrete floor in an abandoned building, and all the candles, and every once in a while goat head or something. But also don't forget, I was on the scene of a couple of cattle mutilations, and those are real. Those are bizarre. So, but never did the crop circles, but did go on a couple of cattle mutilations.
Okay. So I got two more real quick questions, and then we're gonna take a little bit of a break. I got a text from a friend that didn't want to post this on Facebook, and if you don't know, no problem. Is there any updates in that young girl from, I think her name was Kaylee? They said they think their name was Kaylee. I think that was 5 or 6 years ago, and that just kind of dropped off. The young girl, she was at Brentwood Middle School, and they believe her boyfriend killed her, and is he in jail? What are there any updates? Do we know anything more on that? That kind of disappeared.
Yeah, since it's an open investigation, it's sort of like
I understand.
Before open investigations, I think
I understand. I just figured
I kept getting a subpoena saying you said this on this day.
No, I understand. Somebody asked, so I figured I'd bring it up, and I appreciate that. The next question is, I was on a podcast this weekend called Magic and Mystery, and this last week, and one of the things we talked about is the fascination with serial killers and murderers. There are websites that sell murder memorabilia. As being on the other side of this fence, what do you think people's fascination with serial killers is? Why are there people that collect Charles Manson stuff? Why are there people that collect? Now, I went to school to be a history professor, and I remember reading a book called American Brutus, and it's about John Wilkes Booth. And there were people at Lincoln's on the death scene when Lincoln was assassinated that were dipping their programs from My American Cousin in the blood on the floor so they would have a souvenir. I mean, so this isn't new. This goes back to the late 1800s. What do you believe, as somebody who spent their life fighting crime and in law enforcement? What do you believe is the public fascination with the bad guy? I mean, my favorite guys in comic books. I'm a comic book reader. My favorite guys are the bad guys. But well, the bad guys in comic books have better backstories. They do. They just do, in comics at least. Yeah. But what do you think is the fascination with people's? Why do people love serial killers? Why do people still wear Charles Manson on T-shirts? And why do people still watch documentaries about Ted Bundy? What is it?
Yeah, I think there's some romance involved there. Sort of like, during the 1930s, you had Babyface Nelson, you had John Dillinger. I mean, or even go back farther, Jesse James and Frank James,
right?
Dalton. They were all basically heroes. I don't know if it's a Robin Hood syndrome or what it is, but I think what I believe is everyone wants to be a detective and solve a crime. I think that, and being a cop, I think, is right up there in most people's minds. That's why, the police shows were always well received. They even have live cop shows that are entering multiple seasons now. I mean, I find it boring when cops are out there talking to someone who's drunk on the street. But, so I think all of us have that want to solve a crime or figure out what the answers were. And in doing so, sometimes you begin to appreciate the bad guy in that he was able to get away with it. You know, I read every book. You know, they talk about training. What's your training? Well, I've read every homicide book that was ever published between this year and this year. I mean, you know, the Michigan murders. I could not get enough of reading stuff on homicide cases, and I read specifically about solved cases. But as a young person, I read Helter Skelter, which was an amazing hit, or Joseph Wambaugh's The Onion Field, which was another, or Truman Capote's In Cold Blood.
Yeah.
So I read all those books. You know, now I'd listen to them.
Yeah, right. So have you seen the documentary on Netflix called Don't Fuck with Cats?
No.
Okay, so Keith, if you take anything away from the 2 hours you're spending with me on a Sunday afternoon, watch this documentary. Okay. It's on Netflix. It's about a group of there's no better way to say it. If anybody can sum it up better, post it on the Facebook. It's a group of internet warriors. That's the only way I can describe it. That find a guy online that is murdering cats in videos, and they decide they're going to find this guy, and they start looking at the vacuum in the back, finding out where that vacuum is sold, and this pack of cigarettes sitting on the desk, and they eventually find this guy has killed people. And it is only because of this group of people on the internet that have found each other. So just, I don't want to tip it for you too much, but I think it's a 5-part series on Netflix, and it is, I don't know how I got onto it. Somebody recommended it to me. And if anybody has anything more about it, post it on Facebook.
Well, let me tell you something. So when I started in law enforcement back in the 70s, investigative work, the role of a detective was basically an art. I mean, there wasn't a lot of science. Even a fingerprint, if you found a fingerprint on scene, guess what? You had to have a suspect before you could match that fingerprint to a latent print. I mean, so it really served no purpose unless you had a suspect. So there was no science involved really back then other than latent impressions of tennis shoes or tire tracks. But now we have so much. One, the internet is such a great tool for investigation. Then you have CODIS, DNA CODIS, which is solving decades-old homicides. You have APHIS, which if I submit my fingerprints, we had one case where the Frida Winters case was a cold case that remained open. It wasn't until the advent of APHIS where that individual eventually got fingerprinted. He was juvenile when he committed the murder, but eventually his prints got into APHIS, and he kicked it out, years after the homicide occurred. So science is playing a big role. I think you're really stupid to commit crimes or homicides right now, because the law enforcement has so many tools to make sure that you go to prison. I mean, they really do. I mean, just the cameras in the Shauna Nelson trial. Her truck is seen on a camera of a neighboring store, or the Heather Garris homicide. So, her pickup truck is visible on a camera as it's driving through the parking lot of the bank. So and there's cameras everywhere now. So it's a new era, and I think law enforcement is going to be much more effective, which means more people are going to be going to prison for longer periods of time.
Well, and I think we have to assume, and I've said this to both of my daughters and everybody I can think of, we have to assume that everything we do is being recorded, one way or another. Whether what we're searching for on the internet, or what we're driving, or what we're buying, everything, we have to assume there's a record of everything we're doing, good or bad. If you're not up to anything nefarious, then there's no problem. But if you're up, it's we'll talk about the Heather Garris case when we come back. But if you want to take a quick break, I'll do some more plugs. If you need to refill or get another drink, I'll do some more plugs. And I do have a couple questions coming back about the cattle mutilation, so we'll answer those when you get back.
Okay.
So all right, we'll see you in a few minutes. So folks, if you have any questions, chime in. Keith is an encyclopedia of crime. I know that he's studied more crimes than than anybody else I know. So a couple things I want to plug before again is so here's the schedule for the next couple weeks. Next week is Soydan. I can't say enough things about Soydan. He is one of my dear friends. I love the man. He is absolutely. Hey, there's Mrs. Olson. There she goes. All right. So and then and Chris Bugacki. Chris is the Big Icky. You can look them up. I have all links to them on my Facebook page. The next week is Vince Wilson, who from the Poe Theater, the Lord Baltimore Hotel in Baltimore, Maryland, and Paul Prater. And Paul and I were going to do my first tour together this spring. We were going to launch it out of New Orleans and go through Texas and all over and end up back in Colorado. Paul is one of my dear friends, and it's going to be a lot of fun to have on June 7th. It's going to be Paul Prater and Vince Wilson. We're going to talk about ghost tours. We're going to talk about performance. We're going to talk about how not every performance works out the way you want. Sometimes they go completely shithouse, and we'll have some war stories from bad performances. And then the next weekend, June 14th, is Dacre Stoker. We're going to have a fun time. We're going to draw for the Dracula book, and I mean, he's the great grandnephew of Bram Stoker. Are you kidding me? He's got some stories, I'm sure. The Black Monarch, the big announcement's coming on the 7th. We're going to do some stuff up at the Black Monarch Hotel. We originally had planned on doing Mystery Collection Black Monarch weekends at 36 people. We had figured we had enough room for 36 people. After talking with Adam this past weekend, I think with some of the new COVID-19 restrictions and some of the distancing things that are going on, I think we're going to limit it to 12 or 14 people. So we're cutting it we're cutting it by more than half. So when that announcement comes, that announcement will be available to people that follow the Mystery Collection on Facebook first. It will go out. It will have a couple days for Mystery Collection folks to reserve their spots before it goes out to the Black Monarch mailing list, which is 5 or 6 times as large as mine. So you'll have an opportunity first to reserve those spots. It's going to be a really, really special weekend. We've got Adam and I have some really, really fun things planned. That's it for what I've got. If you guys have any questions, pipe them through right now. I've started a list of things for, I think what I'm going to do is I've got schedules through June 14th. And I think the next weekend is Father's Day, and then the next weekend's my birthday. So I'm going to take a couple weeks off. And when I come back in July, I think the format of the show is going to be a little bit different. And I haven't decided what we're going to do. I'm working on making the production value a little bit better, so you don't see me at the very beginning saying, "Oh shit, am I on? Did I figure this out? Are Keith and I both on the same screen?" So we may move it to a Patreon, or we may move it to YouTube. I don't know. We're still working on the ideas of that. I've been approached several times about a Mystery Collection membership, and I brought that up a couple weeks ago, and some folks have come back with some ideas. If you have any idea of what you would want in a Mystery Collection membership, there are shows, there are tours, there are private shows. I'm writing a book. There are kind of curated events. So if you have any idea of what you want for a Mystery Collection membership, please chime in. I've got a couple people that are very interested. I just want to kind of, before I start it, I want to see what people are interested in. I got lots of ideas, and I've had several people come to me with ideas of haunting their house, or finding a ghost, or writing a ghost story based on a story that they know is associated with one of their venues or their restaurants. So there's a lot of and secret handshakes, James. We will have secret handshakes in the club. But I've got a whole bunch of T-shirts that I need to mail out this week. So let me know what you guys are interested in. What would be appropriate for a membership level. So we're gonna turn this Mystery Collection into something that is a little bit. There's some perks of being on the inside. So Keith is back. And before we dive into French, we have a question about can you give us some details about what you saw with cattle mutilations? I have never met an eyewitness, is what our friend says.
Okay, so the one that's in my mind because I got on the front page of the Voice newspaper. It was a full front page photograph of me standing over a mutilated cow. It was out on a ranch near Kersey, and it was surgical cuts, and the entrails had been completely removed. I mean, it was bizarre.
So what do you think? I mean, what do you think? What does investigator Olson think? And then what does Keith think?
The detective thought it was probably just a fad. Once people heard about, this one cow mutilation, is similar to crop circles. I believe that people imitate stuff all the time, and so I think people just, began imitating cattle mutilations. Who knows what the first one was, that started it all? But I think there was a lot of imitation, and I think that's the same with crop circles. I don't know if those are real, but I know that they've caught several people imitating it, and so that's what I suspect. And I think, as Keith, I give the same opinion. I think a lot of it is. I don't think it's Martians, but now with all the files being declassified and released, we're in an exciting time.
Right.
I mean, you can't deny some of the videos from fighter pilots and stuff. So I think they're, I'm not saying that UFOs don't exist.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. So,
but I sure want to see everything that's being released.
Right. And I mean, there's stuff that, they just declassified those videos. What is it, 2 or 3 weeks ago? That are amazing. I mean, they're absolutely amazing, and that's I think. And what's funny about it is, I think Tom DeLonge from the band Blink-182 is the one that spearheaded getting those released, which is pretty fascinating that we're relying on people from pop culture. I mean, my dear friend Giorgio, who chimes in on this show every once in a while, is leading the charge and getting some of this stuff declassified. Yeah. So it's all right. We've got a couple more questions here. So we have a woman named Helen Pease. Do you know Helen?
I've heard of her.
Okay, so Helen says, Keith, you look sunburnt, and I've got to brag. I got to beat you up a little bit for this. So I asked Keith before we went live how he's been handling the lockdown and not being able to go out and do stuff, and his message was his answer was, yeah, I'm getting about as much golf as I want. About how much golf are you playing, Keith?
5 or 6 times a week.
Yeah, right. So don't feel sorry for Keith in retirement. Keith is living the life in Florida on a golf course playing golf. So that's what we all can hope for.
Sometimes 27 holes.
There you go. So okay, so let's see if we have any quick questions here. I think that's okay. So now we're getting to what I originally wanted to talk with Keith about. It's the W.D. French story. W.D. French is a story of that I think you learn about in elementary school by seeing the picture, and I think that's all you see is a picture of a man in a nice suit that is hanging from a tree, and you had that picture sticks in your mind. Well, because I'm that kid. And I've been that kid my entire life. That picture never left. And when I had a chance to talk with Keith about it, and I'd seen there's a local guy who does the reenactment, which I won't get into because anyway, my mom and dad taught me a long time ago, if I don't have anything nice to say, not to say anything. So I don't have anything to say. And but I love the story, and and anybody that's seen the Mystery Collection show understands that my show is built on stories. I don't think there's anything more human than the need to tell and hear stories. I love the idea of storytelling. So the idea of W.D. French just stuck with me. And when I got a chance to talk to Keith about the real story and find out how deep this is. I mean, this is a deep story. You look at that picture and what do you see? You see the guy hanging from the tree. You don't even pay attention to the guys in the background. And Keith, how many of those guys in the background have you identified? A chunk of them, right?
Right. And what's interesting, 2 of them. One Sheriff Jacob Wolliver is in the photograph, standing there with his son, who was started attending Colorado. I forget what it was called, Colorado State. I don't remember the name back then, but anyway, and then he died of pneumonia shortly thereafter. So, and the way you can tell it's Sheriff Wolliver is so I see the badge pinned to the breast of his coat, and so then I go get a picture of Jacob Wolliver as a state legislator and put the picture side by side to prove this is Jacob Wolliver standing next to the suspended body of W.D. French. So a lot of neat stuff in that one. Plus, you can see in the background where the damage to the jail,
right,
where the lynch mob breaks in.
So I'm going to start the story because I'm assuming that most of the viewers don't know. They only know the little bullshit part that I do in my show towards the end. So I'm going to start the story, and please feel free to interrupt me when my creativity gets in the way.
Okay.
So W.D. French was kind of a dick. He was not a nice guy. But he lent a lot of people money. Is that correct?
Yes.
He lent people money that could not get loans from banks, and he charged a higher interest, obviously, and which led him to taking over and foreclosing on several properties. Right?
Yes.
Okay. So was it December 12th that he was December? It was early.
I think 14th.
14th. Okay.
Homicide.
Okay. So on December 14th, he's writing out, and those of you familiar with Weld County. He's out by his ranch was at the BB Draw area, correct?
Yep, LaSalle. Just east and a bit south of LaSalle. Almost if you took a 45-degree path, and if you look at the old maps from then, the road just traveled directly to his farm out of LaSalle.
And all of these maps are on Keith's website at weldcountypass.com. Yep. So all this documentation is there. So they're writing out, and it starts to get ugly. The weather starts to turn as it does in December. And this is where I take over with poetic license. So Keith, I'm going to turn it over to you at French and a couple of his.
Wait, I want to hear. Remind me, and I've seen your show. Remind me the poetic license here.
Well, I tell the base story of him and Woodbury shooting each other. But then I talk about the and I think you told me this, that after French died, they tried to slander French and say that he murdered his wife and his wife did not murder his wife, correct? He did not. She died of natural causes, but there was a charge to blame his wife's murder on WD to kind of make it acceptable that they hung him. And so where I take over and I change the story, and this is one of the discussions we had, I think, at Kinney's Steakhouse over lunch, I came up with the story that he loved his wife and that he kept a pearl that belonged to her in his pocket. And I think your comment was, that cheap son of a bitch would have never bought her a pearl necklace. So I take poetic license with it because it's a great picture and it makes a nice story. But the day of December 14th, 1888, Wilbur French, his son Junie, and a couple other of his employees, right? They're heading home. They're heading back to his farm, which is now out by the BB Draw area, north of LaSalle. And it starts snowing, correct?
Right.
Okay. I'm gonna turn it over to you now, Keith, because this is where I lose track of what is real and what is the mystery collection show.
Okay, so Harry Woodbury was basically a tenant farmer for W.D. French. So they were supposed to sharecropper, tenant farmer, sharecropper. And something happened, don't know the complete story, but they broke up the partnership. Well, there was 600 pounds of flour that W.D. French felt was his and not Harry Woodbury's. Harry Woodbury thought it was his and wasn't about to give it up to French. And so it started this civil case in the courts. And French was real good about going to court and handling it through that way. Well,
French was pretty wealthy, correct? French was a wealthier for the time. French was pretty wealthy.
Oh, absolutely. part of Anschutz ranch out there,
Yep.
East Weld County.
Eagle's Nest, I think is what it's called, Eagle's Nest or something. Yeah.
Yeah, the golf course on Eagle's Nest was land owned by W.D. French.
Okay.
So, but he owned 4 ranches at the time of his death, and he had like 600 head of cattle, which was unheard of. And he had employees who worked the different ranches and farms. He did farming as well, and then his kids. But anyway, so this dispute, French rides into town, goes into the general store in Evans, and Briggs, the owner, tells him, well, did you hear that the judge dismissed your case because you didn't appear in court, and turned the flour over to Harry Woodbury? So French had not received a subpoena and hadn't been notified of the hearing. So he's rather upset, and he says, well, I'll take care of this, assuming that he would just go back to court and say, I just got it. Matter of fact, he pulls the mail out of his pocket and says, I just got this today. He opens it in front of Briggs and says, how was I supposed to know to be there when I just got this? So anyway, so Harry is worried because they pass in Briggs' store. So he knows French is there with a couple of his cowboy hands and his young son. So he runs up to his buddy at the livery stable and gets a gun from him for protection. And at the time, Woodbury is renting part of W.D. French's house in Evans. So Woodbury has the back half of the house, French has the front half, and the half-story upper level, which is a sleeping berth. So it's snowing. French shows up at the house with the cowboys and his young son. They call him Junie. His real name was Wilbur Jr.
Which I want to after this, we got to talk about what happened to Junie.
Oh yeah.
Right.
So French doesn't want to. It's a driving snowstorm. He doesn't want to drive the buckboard all the way to LaSalle with his son and the 2 men. So they're going to sleep in that upper berth. Well, they have to go through Woodbury's living quarters to get there. Woodbury's not about to let him in because he thinks he's going to take the flour
right?
that he's stashed. So he's got the gun. French is mad at him for not opening the door and basically starts to basically tells Woodbury that I'm coming in. So French has a key, unlocks the door to Woodbury's portion of the house, and when the door opens, shots ring out from Woodbury, and the 2 cowboys and Junie flee the residence.
Now French was hit. Was French hit with what? It was nicked in the forehead, right?
Right. So he's wounded, either a bullet grazed or got pistol whipped or something. He's wounded in the head or the cheek. I think probably most likely it was in the cheek, because when he's hanging there, you can see that there's a wound on the side of his face. So French draws his gun, which he always carried, just typical cowboy, always walked around with the gun on his hip, and fired 1 shot, which dropped Harry Woodbury. Obviously, French was used to shooting his firearm, and Woodbury didn't have a lot of experience. So, and then French didn't know what had happened. There was no lights. The candles had been blown out. He just knew that he escaped with his life. So they head to LaSalle, and they sleep there, and word gets out that Harry's been murdered. So they get a posse and go out to French's farm in Beebe Draw and arrest him, Junie, the 12-year-old son, and the two cowhands, and then take him to jail. But Junie is released instead of putting him in jail.
And how old is Junie at the time?
12 years old.
12, okay.
But one of the witnesses said that he had been armed with a handgun too. So they just arrested everybody.
Yeah.
So they stayed locked up until this event. What's interesting is, so once they were put into the jail in Greeley, in Weld County Jail, they put a bunch of sworn deputies around the jail at night because they knew that, there might be a problem, and they had heavy security. Then there's a preliminary hearing, and it looks like French is going to get released. They had 45 witnesses, so word spread quickly that it's not going well. It looks more like self-defense, and so everybody's in Evans is up in arms. They're worried that they had testified against French, and he's a gunslinger. He's going to make our lives miserable. And so
and a bunch of those people owed French money, correct?
Yes. And matter of fact, one person becomes key in this whole story, and that was McPhee. McPhee had defaulted on a loan, and so French had part of the collateral was like 5 or 6 different properties in Evans. French was, besides his ranches, he also owned a lot of lots and property in Evans. So the night before the judge rules on the preliminary hearing, all the security is pulled from the jail. There's not even one deputy in the jail. And so the crowd arrives, and speed up the story. They basically take him out and lynch him to a tree nearby. And then one thing I was able to do is, using the Sanborn fire maps from back then, I was able to locate the exact location of the tree from which French was hung, and then did a layover of the current courthouse. And basically, so the tree that French was hung from is the old courthouse in Greeley, the one that's standing there. The tree stood just a few yards to the south and mostly west side of that area. So right there was where the tree was.
So it had been kind of across from where the old Woody's newsstand was, but further down the block, maybe across more from the trophy shop or wherever that is now, on that block?
No. So, okay, picture the old courthouse. It's in the same plaza, the courthouse plaza,
okay,
right up against the south side of the courthouse. So it's within yards of the old south walls of the courthouse.
Okay. I got you.
So right between the Centennial Center and the old courthouse.
Perfect.
That pathway into the court.
I know right where you're talking about. And so the legend says that shortly after French was hung from that tree, that the tree died. Correct.
Correct.
So that adds to the fun part that I get to play with on my show. So that picture that you show, that it's on the Facebook page, and I've printed them up and I have them available at every mystery collection show. You've identified several of those people. So talk a little bit about that day when those guys broke into the prison. What was the level of resistance from the authorities on that day? I mean, the story goes they went to the hardware store, right, to buy rope, and they were all dressed as women. Is that the story?
Right. Well, one person, it was reported that one person dressed as a woman and possibly having a very deep masculine voice purchased rope at the hardware store. Then there was other rumor saying that they used French's own rope off of his saddle horn to lynch him. But the other interesting thing was there was another individual that went to a doctor to have a sliver removed from his eye. And the doctor said, well, that sure looks like a piece of steel. He says, nah, it's just a wood splinter. So, and then it was presumed that using the pickaxe or whatever, a piece of shard from the axe had pierced his eye. But over the years, so several suspects, it was an easy case. Jacob Wolliver, they go to his house. They're tired of trying to get through the steel and brick. So they go to Jacob Wolliver's house. The sheriff's provided house was right there in that same complex. They go to his house and wake him up and say, hey, we're 100 strong armed men, and they were all wearing masks, and we want the keys to the jail. And the nice sheriff said, well, I don't have them. Those are held by our jailer, Luther. They said, well, where's he live? So he gives them directions to Luther's to go get the key. Luther is an old, salty Civil War veteran. He won't give them the keys. He's being obstinate and saying, you aren't getting the keys. I don't have them. You know, and so they run back to the boss, who is this man with an Irish brogue accent, and they call him Colonel.
Mm-hmm.
And so they go to the sheriff, and the sheriff goes, well, I'll help you get the keys. So they go to Luther again, and Luther even tells the sheriff, I don't have them. so Luther is preventing the lynching, but Wolliver is doing everything he can to make sure this lynching occurs. And in the end, they don't get the keys, so they continue to break in.
And like you said, you can see in the picture where they have removed the bricks around the door to drag him out. So you and I talked one day about how they got Wilbur, or how they got WD out of there. And I imagine, I mean, WD was you can see in the picture, he was not a small man. He was a big.
Right. And in my description of him, this is a tall individual with this, you know, V-shaped barrel chest, mm-hmm. you know, and he was a very intimidating character.
He would not have gone easily. You imagine he would not have gone easily from his cell to the tree.
Right. Except all of them are armed, and he just accepted his fate, I think.
Okay.
Matter of fact, he turns over his personal effects to one of his fellow inmates and says, make sure that my lawyer gets these. So he knows what's going to occur to him.
Do you believe, and there's no way to check this, so I'm just asking you as the expert on this, do you believe French thought that day he was going home?
No.
I mean, do you think that he thought this was his outcome? Do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think even the newspaper believed he was going home, and he had the best attorneys.
Right.
And the case was slim at best.
So as soon as he heard those pickaxes on those concrete blocks, I think French probably knew, fuck, right? I'm screwed. This is the end.
And one of the inmates was saying that, you know, French is yelling out Wolliver's name. You know, somebody get Wolliver. I need help. They're going to lynch me.
Yeah.
And, you know, so he was quite frightened. And one of the newspapers even basically said he was a sniveling coward. You know, so I imagine if I was getting ready to be lynched, I could be brave and accept the fact that I'm going to be lynched and wouldn't be a sniveling coward.
So I show this picture. I show the card at my shows, and I talk a little bit about him. And one of the questions that's come up more than once, which is why I'm asking you, he's well dressed. He's wearing his suit when he's hung. Was that custom for prisoners, or would he have been in a prisoner uniform? Did he change his clothes, or was that what he wore in jail? Because at that point he'd been in jail for 8 days, right. 9 days.
But remember what's occurring at that time. So I assume his attorneys made available for him his better clothes to wear into court. So he's wearing the clothes that were brought to him to put on for the court appearances.
Okay. So what time would this happen at night, though, right?
Right. So the previous day, he had been in court all day.
Gotcha.
Probably 5 o'clock. And then that night, and I'm sure they slept in their clothes.
Gotcha. Okay.
And
so French, I mean, we agree French was not a nice guy, but he was not guilty of the murder of Harry Woodbury.
Well, there was question on whether he was guilty.
Okay.
You know, I don't have all the evidence. I would say by today's law, absolutely not. Colorado has a make my day law,
right,
where if you kick in my door, I'm justified in killing you for nothing other than you forcing your way into my residence.
Right.
As a matter of fact, that's been held to be true if you cross the threshold or stand at the threshold in a threatening manner. Right. So, but back then, if you pull up the Colorado statutes in the Constitution, you could not kill somebody breaking into your house. So there goes the question on whether Harry had the right to kill W.D. French. And the witnesses saying, we were just going to go upstairs and sleep. And the history also shows that French handled all the issues with the 600 pounds of flour through the courts. He could afford attorneys, and he knew Harry couldn't.
Right.
So that's probably what tips the scale in that Harry didn't have the right to shoot at him. And so at the preliminary hearing in the coroner's inquest, the person whose gun was used by Harry Woodbury stated that he could testify that the gun had not been fired. Well, that's not true. There was like 4 different bullets recovered.
Right.
So the stable owner was actually not being truthful.
Okay. All right. So this is the question I've been keeping in my pocket, because you told me this one day, I think over lunch, and this will be, all of my storytelling history nerd friends will absolutely love your answer to this question. Harry Woodbury's wife was named, what was her name? Harry's wife?
Yeah.
Well, she gives the account. She gives the official account of what happened that day. What was Harry Woodbury's wife's maiden name?
Okay, hold on here.
If I remember right, you told me that she was a Pinkerton. Is that correct? That she was somehow related to the Pinkertons?
Checking your.
Well, I hope I didn't make this shit up, because I've been telling this story for years.
Well, so, Pinkertons were involved.
Okay.
You're absolutely right. But my research says,
I thought somehow Mary was related.
Her maiden name was Conley.
Okay.
Conley.
But somehow she was related to the Pinkertons, or there was some relation to the Woodbury family to the Pinkertons.
Right. True.
Oh, so Trina Thurman just said Mary Angus Conley. She corrected us. She beat us to it.
Yeah, I knew it was Conley. So let me see.
So Trina, tell us if you know the relation to the Pinkertons. I love the whole idea of the Pinkertons. I've done a lot of research and read a lot on the Pinkertons in Colorado. They infiltrated a lot of the mines, the mining companies. They were hired by a lot of the mines to disrupt the opposition to mines.
So let me correct you.
Please.
So McPhee, who I believe was the individual who was the colonel with the Irish broke accent, who led the lynching, he's the one that had defaulted on a loan to French. He was the son-in-law of Pinkerton.
Okay. So I stand corrected. Trina has pointed out that I am wrong, and that I'm a moron, and I'm stupid. She didn't say that, but I'm just insinuating that's what she said. So I apologize. But I knew there was a Pinkerton connection.
Yep. And that's to the main, so I say main suspect. He was the leader of the lynch mob.
The colonel.
And here's what's funny.
The colonel.
So the population of Evans at the time was 300 people, right? You have 100 people from Evans show up to lynch W.D. French. This is how difficult this case would have been to solve. So you have 100 people from Evans. You basically have 1/3 of the population in Evans being men. Half of them, let's say half were females. So there's probably only 50 men from Evans who weren't involved in the lynching. So it would have been fairly easy. And remember, GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, which was an association similar to the American Legion or Veterans of Foreign Wars, very powerful organization politically. I mean, they got U.S. Grant elected, and any political race at that time, you had to have the endorsement of the GAR. And McPhee was the post commander of the Evans GAR, which, when you're the post commander or held a state or national level office, you get the honorary title of colonel. And remember, they're all calling him colonel. And this was truly a military operation. They had people posted at all the streets and stuff to prevent any hindrance of them carrying out their job.
So the one of the fun facts of this that I tell at every story, at every show, and God, I've been proven wrong a bunch. I've taken real poetic license with this great story. That the rope still exists. The rope was donated by the mortuary, and it's sitting in the museum, in the downtown Greeley Museum. And I'm not saying that I have a piece of the rope, but I'm also not saying that I don't have a piece of that rope. But the rope is sitting at the Greeley Historical Museums on downtown Greeley, Colorado.
Okay, so here, I like to take credit for the Greeley Museum's, what do they call that? Their W.D. French displays.
And you should take credit for it. You absolutely should.
So what happened is I recovered the original handwritten and typed transcripts from the coroner's inquest. And so I got those donated to the Greeley Museum. They received a grant to improve the quality of them, make sure that they were preserved. And so that set up the W.D. French Museum exhibit, which is neat. You're absolutely right. That rope was part of the evidence. The evidence tag is still on it. It was the portion of the knot that was cut from his neck. Now, what's interesting for you people, you were talking about dipping their
programs in Lincoln's blood, yeah.
Right. So another fascination is, so W.D. French's bar changed over the years, but W.D. Farr purchased the W.D. French ranch, and then also purchased
the brand,
the W. French brand.
Right.
And it is no longer held by anyone. The Farrs lapsed on paying for the brand, so that bar over WF is still an available brand in Colorado, and that was Wilbur French's final brand.
All right, so if we raised some money today to buy the brand, you and I could own the brand by the end of the day.
There you go.
All right, folks, here we go. This is the fundraiser for the day. Here's what I want. I have a Venmo account. It is at the Mystery Collection, and if we can raise, what does the brand cost, Keith? A couple $100?
Yeah, I think annual, it's probably a couple of $100.
So here's what we can do. Here's my challenge to all you guys out there. If we can raise a couple $100, here's what I promised we will do. Keith and I will own the WD French brand, and we'll make t-shirts. How's that? We'll make t-shirts, and everybody who donates gets a t-shirt with the brand on the front and the Mystery Collection logo on the back. And if there's any extra money, I will personally go out and I noticed the French tomb, the French gravestone it needs cleaned, and I need to go out and clean it. I buy cleaning supplies, and I'll go out and I'll clean it, and we'll make sure that it's preserved. But so here's the deal: at the Mystery Collection on Venmo, and Keith and I will buy that brand, and we'll make t-shirts for everybody that donates. How's that? Is that all right,
Sweet.
Keith? Is that fun?
Sweet.
Okay.
Yep.
So the couple other French things before we wrap it up. Why French? What was your fascination? I know you said you saw the picture and that kind of fascinates you, but what was it? I mean, he wasn't a good guy, right? He was kind of a jerk. You told stories about how, I mean, I tried to make the story very romantic, that he loved his wife, and you laughed and you said, nah, he would have never bought that pearl necklace for his wife.
Right. He was a cruel husband. As a matter of fact, she lived in the house that Harry Woodbury died in, and she had died in that same house. Well, French was always out on one of his ranches, so there wasn't this close relationship, and she was ill, and back then it could have been from tuberculosis. Tuberculosis was huge in Weld County in Colorado. I mean, anyone with the lungers all came from back east, because the doctors said go back to Colorado where there's dry climate. It's good for tuberculosis. That's how Doc Holliday wound up in Colorado.
Yeah.
And so Colorado had a lot of cases of people with tuberculosis. So her health was probably due to something similar to that. But also it could have been from a flu because their baby daughter, who's buried right next to them in Lynn Grove, she had died shortly before her mom did. So there might be a flu connection to that as well. So here's the other thing. So I also went out to Lynn Grove Cemetery and asked for their records if they'd let me look at what they had. And I actually found the burial record for W.D. French, and on it, remember, it says hung by a mob. So in the original handwriting, they had the original burials receipt on that. So just neat stuff on that case. And I think the reason why W.D. French is, when reading it, it just sounded like this is so preposterous that this would happen this way. This is a wealthy guy. And also, I was a little upset with the sheriff. So I set out, I think, initially to see if he truly was complicit in all of this. And, you know, I'm thoroughly convinced that French doesn't get lynched without the cooperation of Jacob Woolley.
So, Keith, we have already raised $50. 25 bucks from our friend James Corbin in New Orleans, and 25 bucks that wishes to remain anonymous. So we have 50 bucks towards owning French's brand. So
can you imagine having that? Something. Well, I think it ought to be Mystery Collection. I'll chip in, but I think Mystery Collection ought to be the registered owner.
Well, I actually, it's funny because last year, 2019, I had to actually get my own tax ID number because I made too much money to do it as a side project. It became a real job. The IRS has a really thin line on what they consider a hobby or a job. So, but so no, we're 50 bucks into it. So anybody else, it's at the Mystery Collection on Venmo. And if you have PayPal, or message me and I'll tell you the PayPal info. But we
also make sure, tell them also that Knopfsinger Manufacturing will use their iron to build us our brand. I'm
sure we could probably find somebody that can do that. My association with Knopfsinger Manufacturing is pretty much in name. So it's you know what, this year it's fun. And this is one of the things that I love about the community I grew up in and that I live in. This year, 2020, is the 95th year that Knopfsinger Manufacturing has been on the exact same street corner. 95 years. I mean, that's the to think about what has happened to specifically downtown area in 95 years. I think last week I had this discussion with somebody about the Chief Theater, and I showed some pictures of Chief Theater and what's happened. I mean, you remember Denver Dry, the Denver Dry building, and
sure.
You know, some of the buildings in downtown. So Greeley is I mean, I want nothing more than to get out of Greeley, but I do have my roots here, and I love it, and I understand why the history is significant. So guys, we've got
so it's definitely still home, but I think that's terrific. If you get enough, hopefully it's cheaper than what I think, but I think I think since it's available, I think it's probably $150 or $200.
Okay, so we're 25% there. So at the Mystery Collection on Venmo, chip in. And Keith, shit, I have no idea how to do this. So you're gonna get a phone call from me in a couple days when I have $200. I'm like, how the hell do I do this? But so Keith gets the first T-shirt, and the two donors get the second and third. But yeah, so we've got about 10 minutes left, and I know Keith probably still has about 6 hours of daylight, so you can probably get about 18 holes in, right?
Seriously,
we got another $25, so we're at $75. Ryan Roth, my friend Ryan Roth, pitched in another $25. We're gonna, Keith, you and I are gonna smart ass our way into owning this by the end of the day.
I think that's funny. Show him your gravestone rub-on. I think that would be better on the back of the shirt. I wouldn't ask you, why are you wearing that on your shirt?
So I think it's probably reversed for everybody. So I'll have to figure it out. But I have this hanging in my basement.
No, it looks good.
Okay,
it looks great.
Okay. So yeah, so there's I've recently connected with a couple theater guys who are going to help me write a theatrical presentation of the WD French seance, and we're gonna make it theater. We're gonna make it a real thing. So we're working on that, and we're hoping for maybe 2021, summers 2021 for that. So like I said, guys, we got about 10 minutes left, and Keith's got time for 18, maybe a round and a half of golf left. So if you have any questions,
I got enough time for 18.
Okay. So if we have any questions, let's. Oh, Kirk Goebel sent the link to where we can buy the brand. So thanks, Kirk.
Hey, Kurt, long time no hear.
Yeah. Kirk is a good dude. I like Kirk a lot. So if you have any questions for Keith, I've got him for about another 10 minutes. If it's about Sandoval, you know what sucks, Keith, is I could go another hour with the list of questions I have here. We didn't talk about Sylvia. We didn't talk about the murder of Sylvia Santililla. Is that how you say it?
Yeah. What was amazing about that case is, so that was a gang homicide, and she was,
she was 18 years old. She was 18 years old.
And 2 babies. And she's just standing there, and this other gang, she's standing with, the red gang members. I'm not going to give them any publicity for their names, but the blue team loads up in a truck, and they do a drive-by and shoot and kill her. And not aiming for her directly, but as a result of that, I think there were, because our attitude back then, and also Ken Buck's attitude was, if you're involved in a gang crime, we want you off the street. And as I recall, on that one, we sent 7 people to prison, 2 with life terms. And then so if you, like one of the guys, all he did was drive one of the gang members to help hide the weapon. And so he got a year in jail. But 2 of the shooters, they both got life prisons, and then 4 others, including one of the girls from that gang, got prison time.
So we got 2 real quicks that we forgot to talk about. What happened to Judy? We skipped what happened with Judy. Yeah, Judy.
Well, so remember, these are all orphans. Well, Judy and
how many kids did WD have? How many kids did he have?
I think it was 4.
Okay.
4 that survived at the time that he died. And Judy or Wilbur Jr., so he goes on to medical school and becomes a pediatrician, and becomes he's a professor of pediatrics.
And he was in Chicago, right? He lived in Chicago. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then I think at 46 or 47, he dies. And he dies of a strangulated hernia. I just thought that was so ironic that was his cause.
He choked to death.
Yeah. Bizarre.
Yeah.
Bizarre.
Right.
So and then there was the they all became fairly successful. But French's family, I mean, his sister was married to the Solicitor General of Washington, D.C. I mean, another one was a newspaper publisher in Iowa. But back then, most lynchings, the coroner's inquest always said murdered at the hands of unknown. Yeah. Well, in this particular instance, it was easy to figure out who was responsible, and no one stepped up. And I think that's what drove me, is to, I wanted a record of who likely was involved.
Who was there that night? Yeah. So how's the book? I've had the honor of reading a couple chapters of the book that you sent me early on. How's the book coming along?
Well, I keep trying to figure out how to tell the story of his estate and who the suspects are. Am I going to do a where I go back in time? Because I want to solve this and make a record of these guys were bad people. Wolliver was really a bad person. He became a state legislator. So, and I think he's got grandsons that are still alive and stuff. So I don't want to trash them unless I have at least compelling evidence, which I think I do. So I want to make sure I spell it out to where even a family member would say, yeah, that doesn't look good from dear great great grandfather.
Well, we are now at $150, Keith. So I think you and I own this by the end of the day. So
Ask Goble to do research and tell us quickly how much it costs.
So Keith, you are Kirk. You are now an honorary member of the Mystery Collection. Make this happen for us, if you would, because I'm too dumb to do this. So let's we're gonna own this brand by the end of the day. How funny! What a silly life I live. So the book. I'm not gonna let you get out. When is the book gonna be done? Because I want these for my show. I want to sell the Keith Olson WD French book at my shows.
Okay, I'll get it done here within weeks.
Weeks? I was hoping by the end of the year.
I was reading on the internet. There's a publisher there in Milliken, ebook publisher. I was thinking of using her, but I heard she's in jail.
Yeah, I think her we talked about her a little bit earlier. Kirk says he's working on it, so we'll get to that. So, all right, guys, we've got Keith for just a few more minutes. So I got to tell you, Keith, when I first started this show, my very first one was on a Friday night with my friend James Corbin, and we just sat there and just ran our mouths for 2 hours and talked about our relics and our adventures. And when we got off, I asked James, I said, "Who is your hit list? Who do you want on your show?" And he gave me a short list, and he says, "Who's yours?" And I got to tell you, Keith, you were on the top of the list. I am so glad that we got to connect, and you've been a huge help. And what you've done, I mean, not to get too sappy, but what you've done for our community of Northern Colorado is unmeasurable. Your dedication to the people and to what's right in the community. I mean, your tireless effort to put scumbags like John Sandoval. You didn't stop. You knew from day one that he was the bad guy, and you kept it going. So I am so happy that you came on today. Again, everybody, it's weldcountypast.com and Keith Olson on the Facebook if you get a chance. So Keith, in the last couple of minutes, do you have anything you want to plug, or anything that we missed? I mean, we didn't talk. God, we could go another hour. We didn't talk about Adam Perez. We didn't talk about. We didn't talk about Shauna Nelson and Heather Garris a lot. I mean, we briefly touched it. We could go another hour, but you got to get out there and play some golf. So fight some.
Let me say this for the people who haven't seen your show. I mean, we've been to two of them. One of my last great acts before I left Greeley was take Ed Clark, city council member, and his wife to one of your shows. So Valerie and I attended your last show, and always enjoy it. Great time.
Well, thank you.
And you're a super neat person, and you love Greeley's history as much as I do.
Well, thank you. It's we magic performers, and actually all performers have been really handcuffed over the last couple months, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to do this and to have some other things that are keeping me afloat. But I have friends out there that aren't, and I have friends out there that are worrying about their cell phone bills, and I have friends that are worrying about rent. So my message to all of you out there: if you can help somebody, reach out and help somebody. Not everybody is as lucky as you. Everybody's in a little bit worse position. So do what you can. This is a weird time, especially for people like me that have given up on stable careers, and we go out and perform and try to make everybody. I left a 17, 18 year career in finance to go out and do magic tricks all over the world. And I've got friends that aren't as lucky, that really are struggling. So it's
I think that's what we share in common, is you're doing what you love and always wanted to do, and I got to do what I loved from the time I was a little kid.
Yep. Well, my fifth grade teacher told me that nobody in their right mind would ever pay real money to watch me tell jokes or do magic tricks. So here at 40, I'll be 45 years old in a few weeks, and people are paying real money to do magic, to watch me do magic tricks and tell jokes. So Keith, if you'll hang on a second, I'm gonna wrap up, and then I'll disconnect online, and I'll keep you on for a few seconds. So again, guys, Keith and I, by the end of the day, I hope to have raised $200. Let's see where we are now. we are $50 short. So the next person that comes in with $50 puts Keith and I.
Skates.
Yeah. So the next person that comes in with $50 puts Keith and I as the owners of the WD French brand. I bet you didn't think this shit was going to happen this morning, Keith. And so guys, you know what? I got to tell you, and I say this every time, and I close every show that I do for the Mystery Collection with this. You guys have absolutely made a little boy's dream come true, that I get to do this for a job. I get to talk to my buddies on Sunday afternoon. Keith is a friend. I get to sit and drink beer at my desk with all this bullshit around me. You guys have absolutely made a little boy's dream come true. I hope you tune in next week. I've got Chris, my friend Soydon, and Chris Bugacki, he's gonna put nails and shit in his nose. And then the next week is Paul Prater and Vince Wilson. The following week, we're going to give away a first edition replica copy of Dracula with Dacre Stoker. So, guys, we need about $50 more. Anything over that goes to the restoration and the cleanup of French's grave. If there's any left, I will give it to the Weld County Food Bank, and I'll double it. So, guys, you have no idea how much I appreciate you, and I appreciate everybody watching. I am the luckiest kid in the entire world. And listen to Bill Hicks. Thanks, guys.
See y'all.
All right. Let me log out of here and